The massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber slid open with a sound like distant thunder. Admiral Jake Morrison walked through the entrance, his polished black uniform standing out against the rainbow of alien forms that filled the vast amphitheater. Behind him followed Captain Lisa Hayes and Colonel Ben Parker, their footsteps echoing in the sudden silence that had fallen over the gathered representatives. Morrison had seen many impressive sights during his 30 years of military service, but nothing quite like this. The chamber stretched upward for what seemed like miles, with tier upon tier of seating arranged in perfect circles. Each level housed different species, their various forms creating a living tapestry of the galaxies. Diversity. Some floated in spheres of liquid, others perched on crystalline platforms, and still others moved about on mechanical appendages that clicked against the polished floor. The human delegation made their way to the central podium, a raised platform that put them on display for all to see. Morrison could feel thousands of eyes, sensors, and other sensory organs focused on him and his companions. The weight of humanity's future pressed down on his shoulders as he activated the holographic display system. The first image appeared above the podium, a formation of human warships moving in tight formation through space. The ships looked exactly like what they were, functional, angular vessels built for war. Their hulls showed none of the flowing curves or ethereal beauty favored by most galactic civilizations. Instead, they bristled with weapon mounts, sensor arrays, and communication equipment. A sound erupted from the Zephyrian section that could only be described as laughter. The ambassador, a tall being with skin that shifted through various shades of blue, stood and addressed the chamber. Her voice carried clearly through the translation system that allowed all species to communicate. "These crude metal shells are what humanity considers warships?" she asked, her tone dripping with amusement. "Where are the energy shields that can deflect any attack? Where are the plasma cores that power true weapons of war? And surely they must have quantum displacement drives to match the speed of modern combat." Morrison felt his jaw tighten, but he maintained his professional demeanor. "Our ships are designed for different priorities," he replied. "We focus on endurance, adaptability, and the ability to operate in any environment for extended periods. Our weapon systems emphasize kinetic energy and kinetic energy." The interruption came from the Vorthok representative, a creature that resembled a massive octopus with armor plating covering its tentacles. "You mean you still throw rocks at your enemies? How wonderfully primitive." The laughter that followed this comment rippled through multiple sections of the chamber. Morrison could see Captain Hayes clench her fists at her sides, while Colonel Parker's expression remained stone-faced. They had expected some resistance, but the level of condescension was worse than their worst-case scenarios. Morrison continued his presentation, displaying human tactical formations and combat doctrines. He showed how human forces coordinated between different branches, naval ships working with ground troops, fighter squadrons supporting infantry advances, and intelligence units gathering information for all branches simultaneously. The response was immediate and harsh. The Etherian delegate, a being that appeared to be made entirely of living crystal, chimed in with a sound like wind through a pipe organ. "Your species seems obsessed with these ground conflicts," the translation system conveyed. "In civilized warfare, we simply disable the enemy's primary systems from orbital positions. It is clean, efficient, and results in minimal casualties on both sides. But surely your ground forces have some sophistication," added another voice from the assembly. This came from a Centaurian, whose horse-like lower body supported a humanoid torso, perhaps advanced energy weapons or personal shield generators. Colonel Parker stepped forward. "Our infantry carries chemical propellant weapons, conventional explosives, and relies primarily on training, teamwork, and tactical flexibility." The silence that followed this statement was broken by what sounded suspiciously like snickering from various parts of the chamber. The Aquarian representative, speaking through a device that translated her sonar-based language, managed to sound condescending, even through the mechanical voice. Chemical propellants? You mean gunpowder? The same technology our species abandoned thousands of years ago. Morrison pressed on, showing examples of human combined operations. He displayed scenarios where different units worked together to achieve objectives that none could accomplish alone. The presentation included footage of actual combat operations, carefully edited to remove any classified information while still demonstrating human, tactical principles. The aliens watched with expressions that ranged from boredom to barely concealed mockery. When Morrison showed a clip of human Marines coordinating with naval gunfire support to secure a landing zone, the Zephyrian ambassador actually yawned. "This is all very interesting from a historical perspective," she said, "but surely you understand that modern warfare has evolved beyond such crude methods. When we encounter hostile forces, we engage them in honorable, single combat between matched vessels. The superior technology and skill prevails, and the conflict ends quickly, with minimal disruption to civilian populations." The Vorthok representative added his agreement. "Indeed, our fleets engage enemy fleets in open battle, ship against ship, crew against crew. The side with better training and equipment wins decisively. There is no need for these complicated schemes involving multiple types of forces." Captain Hayes could no longer contain herself. "And what happens when your enemy doesn't follow those rules? What if they use unconventional tactics, or refuse to engage in your idea of honorable combat?" The question caused another wave of laughter. The Etherian delegates' crystal form pulsed with colors that their species used to express amusement. What enemy would be so foolish? Any species advanced enough to pose a threat to our civilizations would naturally understand the principles of efficient warfare. Only primitives engage in the kind of chaotic, unstructured combat your species seems to favor. Morrison felt the presentation slipping away from him. Every point he made was dismissed as outdated, every tactical principle rejected as primitive. The three humans stood alone in the center of the vast chamber, while hundreds of alien representatives discussed them as if they were curious specimens in a zoo. The final humiliation came when the Council moved to formal voting on humanity's application for full membership in the Galactic Defense Coalition. The vote was not even close. Species after species cast their ballots for probationary status only, with humanity assigned to patrol the Outer Rim territories. Perhaps their primitive methods will prove sufficient against pirates and raiders, the Zephyrian ambassador said as she cast her vote. It will give them a chance to observe proper military doctrine in action when real threats arise. As the session concluded, Morrison gathered his materials and prepared to leave. The aliens continued their discussions, speaking about humanity as if the three humans were no longer present. He heard fragments of conversation that made his ears burn with anger and embarrassment. "Did you see those ships? They look like flying factories, and their weapons, chemical explosives and kinetic projectiles. It's like something from a museum. Still, they might have some value in the outer territories. Pirates aren't exactly sophisticated opponents." The human delegation walked out of the chamber in silence. Only when the massive doors closed behind them did Morrison allow himself to speak. "Well, that could have gone better." Colonel Parker nodded grimly. "They think we're cavemen with spaceships, sir." Captain Hayes looked back at the closed doors. "Maybe that's exactly what we need them to think." Morrison smiled for the first time since entering the chamber. "My thoughts exactly, Captain. Let's show them what these cavemen can do." 6 months after the humiliating presentation at the Galactic Council, Commander Alex Stone stood on the bridge of the Earth defense ship Titan, watching the construction crews put finishing touches on Firebase Echo. The human outpost floated in the asteroid field of the Kepler sector, its angular structure looking like a mechanical spider web stretched between several large rocks. The Outer Rim assignment had been meant as an insult. Stone knew that much. The Council had essentially told humanity to go play in the backyard, while the real civilizations handled important matters. What they had not counted on was how seriously humans took any assignment, no matter how trivial it might seem to others. Stone turned from the viewport to study the tactical displays that covered one wall of the bridge. Red markers showed the movements of Ravager Horde ships across 17 different star systems. The nomadic fleet had been growing bolder over the past few years, and the Council races assigned to deal with them had achieved little success. Lieutenant Maya Cruz looked up from her intelligence station. Sir, the pattern analysis is complete. The Ravagers move in completely predictable cycles. They hit a system, strip what they can carry, then move to the next target on a rotation that has not changed in 3 years. Stone nodded as he studied the data. The Ravager Horde was not particularly sophisticated, but they had learned to work within the limitations of Council military doctrine. Each Council race that encountered them followed the same basic approach. Send a single powerful warship, issue a formal challenge, engage in ship-to-ship combat until one side surrendered or was destroyed. The problem is not that the Council races are weak, Stone said to his officers. The problem is that they are predictable. The Ravagers know exactly what to expect from each species. They know a Zephyrian ship will rely on speed and energy, weapons. They know a Vorthok vessel will try to grapple and board. They know an Etherian craft will attempt to disable their systems with precision strikes. Lieutenant Commander Janet Ross, the ship's tactical officer, highlighted several areas on the display. But sir, they have never faced human tactics. They have no idea what to expect from us. Stone smiled. That was exactly what he had been thinking. Get me Captain Hill on the Arizona and Captain Murphy on the Normandy. It is time to show these Ravagers what human coordination looks like. The first engagement came 3 days later, when a Ravager raiding fleet emerged from hyperspace near the mining colony of Prospect 7. The colony's automated distress beacon activated immediately, sending out the standard request for assistance. That had been largely ignored by Council forces for months. This time, the response was different. The Ravager fleet commander, a scarred veteran named Ketch Bloodfang, expected the usual pattern. A single Council warship would arrive within a few hours, challenge him to honorable combat, and either win or lose, based on the relative strength of the two vessels. His fleet of 12 ships had grown confident in their ability to handle such encounters. Instead of one ship, his sensors detected multiple contacts approaching from different vectors. The human response force had split into 3 groups, with each group approaching from a different direction. Ketch had never seen such a tactic before. The EDS Titan came in from the system's outer planets, using their gravity wells to mask its approach. The EDS Arizona approached from the asteroid belt, its signature hidden among the metal-rich rocks. The EDS Normandy came straight in from hyperspace, making no attempt to hide its presence. Ketch focused on the Normandy, assuming it was the primary threat. He ordered 8 of his ships to engage the human vessel, while keeping 4 in reserve. It was a sound, tactical decision, based on everything he knew about space combat. What he did not know was that the Normandy was bait, as his ships closed on what appeared to be a lone human vessel. They found themselves caught in a crossfire from the other 2 human ships. But this was not random shooting. Each human vessel shared targeting data with the others through their communication networks. When the Titan fired on a Ravager ship's shields, the Arizona immediately followed up by hitting the same shield section before it could regenerate. The coordination was unlike anything the Ravagers had ever experienced. Human fighters launched from hidden positions among the asteroids, striking at Ravager supply ships while the main fleet was engaged. The fighter pilots did not seek glorious single combat with enemy fighters. Instead, they worked in groups, covering each other and focusing their fire on critical systems. Ketch tried to adapt. ordering his ships to break off and regroup for a traditional battle line engagement. But the humans refused to cooperate with his tactics. When Ravager ships tried to form up, human vessels appeared behind them, having used the confusion of the initial engagement to maneuver into better positions. The battle lasted for hours. When it ended, 6 Ravager ships had been disabled and captured, while the remaining 6 had fled in different directions. Not a single human vessel had been seriously damaged. More importantly, the human approach had saved the mining colony and captured valuable intelligence about Ravager operations throughout the sector. The prisoners revealed the locations of hidden supply bases and the routes used by other Ravager fleets. Over the following weeks, the human fleet used this information to launch what they called a campaign rather than individual battles. They did not wait for Ravager attacks and then respond. Instead, they hunted down Ravager supply lines, communication relays, and staging areas. Lieutenant Cruz coordinated intelligence gathering from multiple sources, captured prisoners, intercepted communications, surveillance drones, and reports from grateful colonists. She built a comprehensive picture of Ravager operations that allowed the human fleet to stay one step ahead of their enemies. The results were dramatic. Within 2 weeks, Ravager activity in the Kepler sector dropped by 60%. The surviving raiders found themselves constantly looking over their shoulders, never knowing when or where humans might appear. Captain Hill reported the most telling incident during a staff meeting aboard Firebase Echo. His ship had cornered a small Ravager squadron near a gas giant. Instead of fighting, the Ravager commander had immediately surrendered, begging not to be sent to the pack hunters who fought without honor. "They do not understand us," Hill explained to the assembled officers. "They keep expecting us to follow their rules, to fight the way everyone else fights. When we do not, they do not know how to respond." Commander Stone nodded. "The Council races have been fighting the same way for so long that everyone knows what to expect. We bring something new to the equation." The success in the Kepler sector did not go unnoticed. Reports filtered back to Council space, though not in the way the aliens expected. Instead of glorious battle reports, they heard whispers from traders and refugees about battles that ended not with spectacular explosions, but with systematic dismantling of enemy capabilities. Some Council representatives dismissed these reports as exaggerations. Others began to wonder if perhaps they had underestimated the humans. But most continued to believe that the success was due to beginners' luck and the Ravagers' unfamiliarity with human tactics. They were about to learn that humanity was just getting started. Firebase Echo was already coordinating with other human outposts throughout the Outer Rim, sharing intelligence and tactical innovations. What had started as a single assignment to deal with pirates was becoming something much larger. The humans were not just adapting to their new role, they were revolutionizing it. Word of human successes in the Outer Rim traveled through the galaxy like ripples in a pond, but not in the grand announcements that usually marked military victories. Instead, the stories came through whispered conversations between traders at spaceports, through coded messages sent by refugees to their families, and through intelligence reports that made their way to Council databases with increasing frequency. Admiral Morrison had been planning for this moment since the day they left the Council chambers. On the frontier world of New Gettysburg, construction crews worked around the clock to complete the Human Military Academy. The sprawling complex of training facilities, classrooms, and simulation centers represented humanity's most ambitious project since joining the galactic community. The Academy's first class of observers arrived 6 months after its completion. Representatives from 12 different Council species gathered to witness what humans called their training methods. Most came expecting to see primitive tactics dressed up with fancy technology. What they saw instead challenged everything they thought they knew about warfare. Captain Dan Murphy led the first demonstration for the assembled alien observers. His battalion of 300 Marines moved through a simulated urban environment. that recreated the conditions found on dozens of contested worlds throughout the galaxy. The observers watched from elevated platforms that gave them perfect views of the action below, unlike the alien military demonstrations they were accustomed to seeing. There were no individual heroes charging forward to single-handedly defeat the enemy. Instead, the human soldiers moved in small groups, each supporting the others in a complex dance of advance and cover that flowed like water around obstacles. The cetacean observer floated in her mobility tank, her whale-like form turning to track the movement of human squads as they cleared building after building with methodical precision. Through her translation device, she addressed Captain Murphy during a brief pause in the exercise. "Your soldiers move like a single organism," she said, her mechanical voice carrying a note of puzzlement. "But where is the individual glory that drives warriors to greatness? Where is the heroic single combat that proves the worth of a fighter?" Sergeant Kate Lewis looked up from checking her squad's communication equipment. The veteran of 3 campaigns in the Kepler sector had earned more decorations than most alien warriors received in their entire careers. But she wore no visible signs of rank or achievement that would mark her as special. "Glory does not take objectives, ma'am," Lewis replied in the matter-of-fact tone that characterized most human soldiers. "Teamwork does." The demonstration continued with scenarios that showcased different aspects of human military doctrine. The observers watched human forces coordinate between air and ground units, with pilots providing support exactly where and when ground commanders needed it. They saw engineering units working alongside combat troops to overcome obstacles that would have stopped conventional forces. Most shocking to the alien observers was the speed with which human units adapted to changing conditions. When the simulation introduced unexpected enemy reinforcements, human commanders did not pause to request new orders from higher authority. Instead, they modified their tactics on the spot, repositioning their forces and adjusting their objectives to match the new situation. The Zephyrian military attaché, a different individual from the ambassador who had mocked humanity at the council, found herself taking detailed notes as she watched human squads coordinate their movements through complex, urban terrain. Her species had always prided itself on individual speed and agility, but she had never seen anything like the collective mobility displayed by human units. During the after-action briefing, the alien observers peppered the human instructors with questions that revealed how different their approaches to warfare truly were. The Vorthok representative wanted to know why human soldiers did not compete with each other for the honor of leading assaults. The Etherian delegate asked why human commanders shared information so freely instead of hoarding intelligence that might give them personal advantages. Colonel Rick Davis, the Academy's commandant, answered each question with patience that barely concealed his frustration at their fundamental misunderstanding of human methods. "War is not a competition between individual warriors," he explained for the 3rd time. "It is a problem that requires a solution. The best solution usually involves everyone working together toward the same goal." Meanwhile, out in the outer rim territories, human forces were putting these principles into practice against increasingly sophisticated opponents. The Shadowclaw Syndicate had operated criminal enterprises across 15 star systems for more than 50 years. Their network of smugglers, pirates, and corrupt officials had survived every attempt by Council forces to shut them down. The Shadowclaw leadership had grown comfortable with the predictable responses of different alien species. When Zephyrian patrol ships appeared, they used their superior knowledge of local space to outrun them. When Vorthok enforcement vessels tried to board their ships, they fought brief, vicious battles that usually ended with both sides withdrawing. When Etherian peacekeepers attempted to negotiate, they stalled until their ships could escape to another system. Human forces approached the Shadowclaw problem differently. Instead of reacting to criminal activity after it happened, they studied the entire network to understand how it functioned. Intelligence officers like Lieutenant Commander Julie Brooks spent months tracking financial transactions, communication patterns, and supply chains that connected seemingly unrelated criminal activities. The operation against the Shadowclaw Syndicate began not with a dramatic assault on their main base, but with a series of apparently unconnected incidents across multiple star systems. A corrupt port official was arrested here, a smuggling route was interdicted there, a money laundering operation was shut down somewhere else entirely. Each individual action seemed minor, but together they created a cascade of failures throughout. The criminal network, Shadowclaw operations, that had run smoothly for decades, suddenly found themselves unable to function. Communications became unreliable, funding dried up, and safe havens turned into traps. The syndicate's leader, a Trilaxia crime boss called Vex the Red, tried to respond using traditional methods. He sent his best enforcers to eliminate what he assumed were rival gangs moving into his territory. He increased security around his main operations. He even reached out to corrupt council officials who had protected his interests in the past. None of these responses addressed the real problem. Human forces were not competing with the Shadowclaw Syndicate for territory or resources. They were systematically dismantling the conditions that allowed organized crime to exist. The final phase of the operation lasted only 6 days, with their support network in ruins, and their leadership scattered across the sector. The remaining Shadowclaw forces found themselves isolated and outnumbered. Most surrendered without firing a shot. The few who chose to fight discovered that human tactical coordination worked just as well in small-scale operations as it did in major battles. Within a year of beginning operations in the Outer Rim, human-controlled sectors had become beacons of stability and prosperity. Trade routes that had been too dangerous for civilian traffic were now patrolled by human vessels that seemed to appear whenever trouble started brewing. Colonies that had struggled against pirate raids for generations suddenly found themselves able to focus on peaceful development. The transformation was so dramatic that it could not be ignored, even in the halls of the Galactic Council. Intelligence reports piled up on the desks of council representatives, documenting success after success achieved by forces that most aliens still considered primitive. But the real test was approaching. Deep space monitoring stations had detected the advanced scouts of the Hegemony, a militant empire from the galactic core that had been expanding steadily toward council space for the past decade. Their forces had crushed 3 different council fleets in formal battles, and their advance seemed unstoppable. The council's emergency session lasted less than 2 hours. When it ended, humanity had been given authorization to prove their doctrine against what the aliens considered a real military threat. Admiral Morrison received the message while reviewing training reports at the Academy on New Gettysburg. He'd read it twice, then smiled and reached for his communication device. It was time to show the galaxy what human military doctrine could really accomplish. The Hegemony war fleet that emerged from hyperspace in the Centauri sector was a sight designed to inspire terror in any conventional military force. 500 warships arranged themselves in perfect geometric formations that stretched across millions of kilometers of space. Each vessel gleamed with the polished perfection that marked advanced alien technology. Their hulls, shimmering with energy shields that could deflect most known weapons, at the center of this massive formation flew the command dreadnought Overlord's Fist, a vessel so large that it cast shadows over the smaller ships around it. The dreadnought alone carried more firepower than most planetary defense systems, and it served as the mobile headquarters for Commander Supreme Vexcaller, the most successful military leader in Hegemony history. Vexcaller had conquered 17 sectors for his empire over the past 20 years. His tactical record showed nothing but victories, each achieved through the application of overwhelming firepower and rigid military doctrine that had proven superior to every enemy force he had encountered. The briefing materials on human capabilities that his intelligence staff had prepared were dismissed as council propaganda designed to make their newest members appear more valuable than they actually were. Standing on the bridge of his flagship, Vexcalar studied the tactical displays that showed the disposition of enemy forces in the Centauri sector. The human response fleet was less than half the size of his own force, and their ships looked like crude industrial machinery compared to the elegant instruments of destruction under his command. The human fleet was commanded by Admiral Grace Turner aboard the Earth defense ship Constitution. Her force consisted of 230 vessels of various sizes, supported by mobile supply stations and communication relay ships that looked more like merchant vessels than military craft. To Vexcalar's experienced eye, the human formation appeared confused and disorganized. Commander Luke Barnes, Turner's tactical officer, looked up from his sensor station as the hegemony fleet completed its deployment. Admiral, enemy forces are requesting formal terms of engagement. They want to establish rules for the coming battle, according to standard galactic military protocols. Turner studied the enemy formation on her command display. The hegemony ships had arranged themselves in the classic battle formation that had dominated galactic warfare for centuries. It was textbook perfect for fighting other conventional forces that followed the same basic principles of engagement. Send them our response, Turner said calmly. We decline formal engagement under their terms. All units implement Doctrine 7 immediately. What happened next shattered every assumption about space warfare that the galaxy had held for thousands of years. Instead of moving forward to meet the hegemony fleet in the traditional battle line engagement that Vexcalar expected, the human ships scattered in all directions. Some headed for the system's asteroid belt, others moved toward the outer planets, and still others seemed to simply vanish from sensor readings entirely. Vexcalar watched this apparent retreat with satisfaction. The humans recognize our superior force and attempt to flee, he announced to his staff. All units will pursue and destroy enemy vessels. We will show the galaxy what happens to those who oppose the hegemony. But the pursuit that followed revealed the first fatal flaw in hegemony thinking. Their ships were designed for short, decisive battles between matched fleets. When the enemy refused to stand and fight, hegemony vessels found themselves chasing targets that seemed to know exactly where they were going while the pursuers did not. Human ships used their superior sensor networks and communication systems to maintain perfect awareness of enemy positions, while remaining largely invisible to hegemony sensors. When a group of hegemony vessels closed on what appeared to be a fleeing human ship, they often found themselves facing coordinated attacks from multiple directions by enemies who had been tracking their movements for hours. The first phase of the battle lasted 18 hours. Hegemony ships, designed for the rapid energy expenditure of conventional combat, found their power reserves steadily draining as they pursued an enemy that struck from unexpected angles, and then disappeared before effective retaliation was possible. Human fighters and gunboats operated from mobile bases that had been hidden throughout the system days before the hegemony arrival. These small craft conducted hit-and-run attacks on hegemony supply lines, communication relays, and sensor stations. Each individual attack was minor, but together they created a steady degradation of hegemony capabilities. Vexcalar grew increasingly frustrated as his perfect formations were forced to adapt to an enemy that refused to fight according to established rules. His ship commanders reported constant harassment from enemies that appeared and vanished like ghosts. Supply convoys found themselves under attack from forces that seemed to know their routes in advance. On the third day of the battle, Vexcalar thought he had finally trapped the main human fleet near the system's primary gas giant. Sensor readings showed a large concentration of human vessels, apparently cornered against the massive planet's gravity well with nowhere left to run. He committed 60% of his remaining force to what he expected would be the decisive engagement. The hegemony ships moved in perfect formation toward their trapped enemies, weapons charging and shields at maximum power. Vexcalar prepared to broadcast the surrender demand that would end this frustrating campaign. The trapped human ships turned to face their pursuers as expected. but instead of showing signs of defeat, they seemed almost eager for the coming battle. Admiral Turner stood on the Constitution's bridge, watching the approaching hegemony formation with the calm expression of someone whose plan was unfolding exactly as intended. "All units," she said into her communication system, "execute maneuver. 12 on my mark." The gas giant that the hegemony forces had thought was trapping the human fleet suddenly revealed its true purpose. Ships that had been hiding in the planet's ring system for days emerged from concealment, their signatures masked by the electromagnetic interference that made the rings impossible to scan effectively. The hegemony force found themselves surrounded by human vessels that attacked with the coordination of a single organism. Each human ship knew exactly where every other friendly vessel was located and what it was doing. They shared targeting data instantaneously, concentrated their fire on specific enemy ships until those vessels were disabled, then moved on to the next target. Vex Kalar watched his carefully planned assault dissolve into chaos, as his ships found themselves fighting a battle they had never trained for. Every tactical manual in the hegemony military assumed that the enemy would follow the same basic rules of engagement that had governed warfare for millennia. The humans followed no such rules. The Battle of Centauri lasted 6 days total. When it ended, the hegemony fleet that had seemed invincible at the beginning of the week had been systematically dismantled, not destroyed in the glorious explosions that marked traditional space battles, but methodically disabled, captured, or forced to surrender by an enemy that treated war as a problem to be solved, rather than a contest to be won. Of the 500 ships that had entered the Centauri sector, fewer than 50 escaped to carry word back to the hegemony homeworld. The rest sat powerless in space, their crews taken prisoner by forces they still did not understand. Vex Kalar himself found himself confined in a holding cell aboard the Constitution, staring at walls that seemed impossibly crude compared to the advanced technology he was accustomed to. The humans had treated him with professional courtesy, but he could see in their eyes that they viewed him not as a defeated warrior, worthy of respect, but simply as a problem that had been solved. Admiral Turner visited him once during the journey back to Council Space. She found him sitting in stunned silence, still trying to understand how his superior force had been defeated. "Your ships were better than ours," Turner said. "Your weapons were more powerful, your shields stronger, your individual crews probably more skilled." Vex Kalar looked up at her, with eyes that showed his complete confusion. "Then how did you defeat us?" Turner smiled, but it was not the cruel smile of a conqueror gloating over a fallen enemy. It was the patient smile of a teacher about to explain something important. "Because we did not try to beat you ship for ship or warrior for warrior," she said. "We worked together." The aftermath of the Battle of Centauri sent shockwaves through every civilized world in the galaxy. News of the hegemony's complete defeat traveled faster than their surviving ships, carried by traders, diplomats, and intelligence agents who could barely believe the reports they were transmitting. The hegemony high command, faced with the loss of their most powerful fleet and the capture of their greatest military leader, found themselves in a position they had never experienced before. For the first time in their imperial history, they were forced to consider terms other than unconditional surrender from their enemies. The peace negotiations lasted exactly 4 hours. The hegemony delegation, led by Supreme Chancellor Kethmorak himself, arrived at the neutral station, expecting to face the usual demands for tribute, territorial concessions, and public humiliation that typically followed military defeat. Instead, Admiral Turner presented them with a single-page document that outlined humanity's terms. The hegemony would withdraw all forces to their original borders, cease all expansion into council space, and establish trade relationships with their former enemies. In exchange, all captured hegemony personnel would be returned unharmed, and the disabled ships would be repaired and returned to their crews. Kathmorak read the document 3 times before speaking. "These terms are remarkably generous for a total victory," he said through his translator. "What is the real price you demand?" Turner looked across the negotiating table at the alien leader, who had terrorized a dozen sectors with his armies. "The real price is that your people learn there is a better way to expand than through conquest. Trade builds wealth for everyone involved. War only destroys it." The treaty was signed before the day ended. The hegemony, faced with the prospect of continued war against an enemy they could not understand or defeat, chose the path that seemed impossible just weeks earlier. But the real revolution was happening within the halls of the Galactic Council itself. The emergency session called to discuss what Council records would later refer to as the Centauri incident was unlike any gathering in the organization's 1,000-year history. Representatives who had dismissed human tactics with condescending laughter now sat in stunned silence as Admiral Morrison presented detailed battle reports that challenged everything they thought they knew about modern warfare. The holographic displays showed hegemony ship movements throughout the 6-day battle, tracked and recorded by human sensor networks that had maintained perfect situational awareness, even during the most chaotic phases of combat. The alien representatives watched formations that they had considered invincible, systematically outmaneuvered and defeated by forces that should have been hopelessly outclassed. The Zephyrian ambassador, the same individual who had mocked human ships as crude metal shells just 2 years earlier, was the first to speak when Morrison finished his presentation. "Your doctrine," she said, her voice lacking any trace of its former arrogance. "It prioritizes mission success over individual glory, coordination over demonstration of superior technology. We find ourselves forced to ask why your species chose this approach." Morrison gestured to the tactical displays that still showed the final positions of ships from both fleets after the battle's conclusion. "Because wars are not won by heroes, Ambassador. They are won by ordinary people working together toward a common goal." The Etherian delegate's crystalline form pulsed with the deep colors that indicated intense thought among his species. "Your forces achieved complete victory, with minimal casualties on both sides. The hegemony fleet was neutralized rather than destroyed. This suggests a philosophy that values the preservation of life even among enemies." Colonel Sarah Martinez, who had recently been appointed as the new director of the expanded Human Military Academy, stepped forward to address this observation. "Our doctrine is built around the idea that the best victory is one where your former enemy survives to learn from their defeat and perhaps become an ally in the future." The silence that followed this statement stretched for several minutes as alien representatives struggled to process concepts that contradicted everything their civilizations had believed about the nature of conflict and victory. The paradigm shift that followed was gradual but undeniable. Within months of the Centauri battle, Council races began requesting human military advisors for their own forces. The rigid, formal combat doctrines that had dominated galactic warfare for millennia gave way to flexible, adaptive strategies based on human models. Captain Troy Anderson found himself commanding integrated fleets where human vessels worked alongside ships from a dozen different species, each contributing their unique capabilities to a coordinated whole. The differences that had once been sources of mockery and division became advantages that made the combined fleets stronger than any single species force could ever be. Zephyrian speed complemented human coordination. Vorthok resilience provided the backbone for extended operations that human endurance made possible. Etherian precision targeting worked perfectly with human tactical flexibility. The galaxy discovered that diversity was not a weakness to be overcome, but a strength to be celebrated. The Human Military Academy on New Gettysburg expanded rapidly to accommodate students from every member species of the Council. What had begun as a demonstration facility became the premier military education institution in known space. Alien officers who graduated from human training programs returned to their home worlds carrying new ideas about cooperation, adaptation, and the true meaning of victory. Within 5 years, what Council historians called the human doctrine had become the standard military philosophy taught at defense academies throughout civilized space. The Outer Rim territories, once written off as worthless backwater regions, suitable only for primitive human methods, had become the most stable and prosperous area of the galaxy. Trade routes that had been too dangerous for civilian traffic for generations now carried merchant vessels under the protection of mixed species, patrol fleets trained in human tactical principles. Colonies that had struggled against pirate raids and criminal organizations found themselves able to focus on peaceful development and growth. The transformation was most visible in the council chambers themselves. Admiral Morrison, now serving as the galaxy's first supreme military coordinator, stood before representatives who had once dismissed humanity as primitive newcomers. Those same representatives now included humans from across the expanded frontier, working alongside alien colleagues who had learned to value cooperation over competition. "The galaxy is vast," Morrison said, as he concluded his annual report to the Council, "and there are threats we have not even imagined yet. But as long as we stand together, as long as we remember that our differences make us stronger rather than weaker, there is no challenge we cannot overcome." The response was immediate and enthusiastic, not the polite acknowledgement that had characterized traditional council sessions, but genuine excitement for the future they were building together. Outside the chambers, massive windows, mixed fleets of human and alien ships patrolled in perfect formation. Their crews had been trained in academies where former enemies learned to trust each other with their lives. Veterans of the HFY War worked alongside officers from species that had once considered each other inferior or incompatible. The primitive newcomers had become the teachers. The galaxy they protected had become stronger, more prosperous, and more united than anyone had thought possible. In the end, the greatest victory was not the defeat of the hegemony or the elimination of piracy in the Outer Rim. It was the discovery that the differences between species were not obstacles to overcome, but gifts to be shared. The Council had mocked Earth's war doctrine until it proved that the strongest force in the universe was not superior technology or individual heroism, but ordinary people of all species working together toward a common goal.